There's a saying in our firehouse that everyone goes home. And we know the perils in our job every time we hear the tone. And on this day we fought a blaze. We did our job, 4 lives were saved. But in the end I sacrificed my own. I hear bells in the distance, pipers playing a song for me, where flags are folded in our memory. I'm going home to Emmitsburg. They'll call my name in Emmitsburg, where tears are shed and prayers are heard for the fallen and the brave. There is peace above the embers, a lightness in the air, as I float above the members of my station in despair. For through the smoke we face our fears, the lives we saved as souvenirs. I go without regret as I declare. I hear bells in the distance, pipers playing a song for me, where flags are folded in our memory. I'm going home to Emmitsburg. They'll call my name in Emmitsburg, where tears are shed and prayers are heard for the fallen and the brave. And the families that we leave behind will gather where I'll be enshrined, along with all the others, and they'll see they're not alone. And the names carved in the monument say it loud and confident, we'll never be forgotten, and we've made it safely home. I hear bells in the distance, pipers playing a song for me, where flags are folded in our memory. I'm going home to Emmitsburg. They'll call my name in Emmitsburg, where tears are shed and prayers are heard for the fallen and the brave. And where tears are shed and prayers are heard for the fallen and the brave.
Thank you so much. And by virtue of being from Buffalo, New York, that does make me, by your terms, a Yankee. I proudly admit that. Also makes me a Yankees fan. Any Yankees fans here? Okay, one, all right. A little brotherly love there. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Tennessee does not have a professional baseball team. Is that accurate? Well, don't worry. The Buffalo Sabres don't have a professional hockey team either. So I don't know if you know the record that they achieved this year, but the first team ever to be ranked 31st in the National Hockey League, now with the addition of Las Vegas. So the first time ever that's happened. So let's get some things going here. And I'm going to kick it up a beat here, just as Chief Love did for you as well. Anybody ever seen that video before? That was created by the Pennsylvania State Department of Health back in 2005. And by my standards, probably still one of the, if I can dare say, sexiest recruitment videos ever made. Part music video, part movie trailer. They showed it in movie theaters across their state. And in about, I think over a 3-year period, brought 8,000 new EMTs and paramedics into their fire system. Pennsylvania, like many states around the country, is currently going through a lot of struggles associated with recruitment and retention of volunteer fire and EMS. And that's what we're here to talk about today. And I have to give a plug to Chief Love and some of the things that he had shared earlier. One, his little dig about not waiting until he was retired to go on the road sharing his message really resonated with me because, well, I just retired in January. And prior to that, for about the last 20 years, I served as the Deputy Fire Coordinator for the Erie County Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, which is Buffalo, New York, is our county seat. That made me responsible for the recruitment, training, and mutual aid operations of our county's 97 fire departments and over 6,000 volunteer firefighters. We have more volunteer firefighters in our county than some folks have in their state. One of the things I was proudest of during my tenure there is that we were consistently bringing in 500 to 700 new volunteers every single year into our fire system. Now you hear those types of numbers and they're great recruitment numbers, and naturally a lot of people would ask me, well, what are your retention numbers? And I half jokingly say, I don't know and I don't care. Because one thing I have learned of being directly involved in the recruitment and retention of volunteer fire and EMS for over 28 years is that it's no longer a cyclical challenge, it's a constant challenge, and therefore it needs to be addressed constantly. And it needs to, one thing I have learned is that we can never take our foot off the gas of feeding the front end of our volunteer pipeline. So whether you're flush with volunteers or you've somehow managed to flush your volunteers, one of the things that we'll talk about today is the need to constantly recruit more and the benefits of doing that. But going back to Chief Love's comment about not waiting until he was retired to share his leadership message, it's been decades now, I'm not even sure how long, when I made the very conscious decision and the choice that more and more every single day this is less and less my fire service. And I had choice to make. I could let it slip away, I could waste it away, or I could give it away openly and willingly. And hopefully you'll see after the end of our conversation today the path that I chose, and that is to give it away openly, willingly, and with a sense of urgency as quickly as possible. So again, thank you to Chief Love for him taking that initiative as well and sharing his message with us, giving away his fire service to all of us and the lessons that were learned with it. So thank you certainly to the Tennessee Fire Chiefs and the IFC and their Workforce Solutions program and the folks that brought me here and are going to bring me across your state 3 times over the next year, and certainly to be able to be partnered up with folks like Matt Love, and unfortunately Miss Vicki couldn't be here with us this morning, but I get to work with her extensively through the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, and that's why I showed that video at the beginning of all my conversations titled The Fallen and the Brave, written and produced and presented by Dave Carroll, because of the importance of the work of the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. It's also the reason that I wear their apparel, if you will, every time that I'm in front of other firefighters. I have the distinct privilege of serving as a volunteer as the director of the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation's Hero Tribute Team, where each October during the Memorial Weekend, I interview the families, the survivors of fallen firefighters. And I tell firefighters of all ages, you spend 5 minutes with a survivor, a family member of someone who is lost in the line of duty, and you will never look at anything you've done or anything you will do in the fire service the same way again. So again, the importance of sharing that message. This is my contact information. You can take a snapshot of that with your cell phone. Otherwise, I have cards available as well, and I'm sure on the materials that you've been provided as well. But I also put this up here for a different reason. I half jokingly tell people that I suffer from multiple personalities, half jokingly. The only difference for each of my personalities is that each one has its own website, its own Facebook page, and its own Twitter feed. So you think it's bad when the voices in your head start talking to each other. Wait till they gang up on you online. But really what this is a physical representation, an online representation of the compartments of my mind, how I view fire and emergency services. And we won't get into any one of them at distinct depth, but I just want to kind of give you an overview. TigerSchmittendorf.com I refer to as my flagship website. I'm proud of 2 things associated with that. First, that I came up with the name of it all by myself. Secondly, that I snatched up that URL before somebody else did, because you know they were just lining up to do that. But if you go there, you'll read some of my full-length feature type writing. I find writing very therapeutic and try to do it as often as possible. RunToTheCurb.com is based on my story of talking about when we were kids. Whenever we heard sirens or saw flashing lights, we ran to the curb to see where the fire engines were going. And truth be told, I grew up in a small town, Angola, about 25 miles south of Buffalo, right on Lake Erie. I lived on pretty much at the time what was a country road, but running to the gravel by the side of the road just doesn't have quite the same catchy phrase to it. So I leave it to RunToTheCurb.com, and there's 3 parts of every Run to the Curb story, and I have firefighters from all over the world who have shared their Run to the Curb stories of how they got started in the fire service, how they got to where they are today, but most importantly, as I do with everything, I end with a message of hope, and I have them share what keeps them going every single day. And Chief Love talked about that. It's about leadership is not just being in the position, but actively serving in that capacity and giving back. And I was amazed once again at all the corollaries between our programs, and maybe you'll stumble upon some of the same revelations as we go through today, despite the fact that until dinner last night we had never met before, nor did we collaborate on what we are going to share today. So FireRecruiter.com is just simply a free clearinghouse for best practices and tools and resources related to recruitment and retention, because that is one of my biggest passions in the fire service. TrainYourReplacement.com is based on 2 simple premises. One, it's my own self-admission that it took me too long into my career to realize I have only ever had one job in the first place, and that is to train my replacement. But I'm convinced that the earlier, more often we can proliferate the train your replacement attitude, if you will, the longer, more successful careers we will all enjoy. And the simple analogy I use to demonstrate that is, if you got into your volunteer fire department last month and somebody new comes along this month and all you do is show them how to use the key or the key fob to get in the firehouse, you just committed an act of training your replacement. So again, the more that we can proliferate that, as soon as we learn something, we share it with someone else, we will all lead longer and more successful careers. And then the last site, soldierfirefighter.com, is all about connecting veterans with the volunteer fire service. Because if you think about it, we are the same people, we're looking for the same people. We don't need to teach them our value system, we need to learn more about their value system. In case I don't share it with you later, you can actually, again, go to my website and see an article I wrote for Fire Rescue Magazine titled Making the Veteran to Volunteer Connection. And what started out as what I just saw as a no-brainer, low-hanging fruit solution to many of the challenges we face in our volunteer fire service today because of the connections between the military and our paramilitary fire service organizations. The more I delved into the PTSD issues and specifically the suicide rate amongst returning veterans, I feel strongly that not only do we have enormous opportunity, but we have enormous obligation to welcome them and their families into our fire service family. Because if you ask any returning veteran what they miss about active duty, they're going to tell you camaraderie, adrenaline rush, sense of value, sense of belonging, and the mission. What do we offer in the volunteer fire service? All those things, right? Absolutely. So what we really do is we offer them a step down and a reintegration process that by at least my estimation, no other volunteering opportunity offers them. So all it is, soldierfirefighter.com is a platform to share those ideas and to sell those ideas first to our volunteer fire service, because we're the ones who have to adapt to that and adopt it. And then work forward from there to elicit involvement from our military and taking care of their families. So that's my life in a nutshell. Here are some of the things that we're going to talk about. This is actually a small portion of a much larger workshop that I offer. And because our focus today is primarily on the retention part, there's several things that are great out there that we're not going to get to. But as I always have to do before I get started, I always have to lead with my disclaimers, rules of engagement, and other stuff my wife makes me say. That's my wife, Lori. We had a big fall season. My daughter, Kathleen, just turned 29. She got married November 25th. My wife had a big birthday on November 30th. I filed for retirement on December 1st. We celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary on December 26th, the day after Christmas. I consider that one of her greatest accomplishments. Because, right, are we easy to be married to? Are we easy to be in a relationship with? And regardless of which side of that equation you're on? Absolutely not. And I truly credit her with everything I am today and everywhere that I go today. And I owe her so much. Pay no attention to the two goons behind us. On the left, John Lattimore and Pat Davis on the right, two of my very best friends. Also two past chiefs of my own volunteer fire company, the Evans Center Volunteer Fire Company in Angola, New York. Also the two primary reasons I'm currently petitioning Congress to make photobombing a federal offense. And then to wrap up our fall, I retired on January 17th on my birthday, the first day that I could legally retire. And I remember that 1 hour I was retired because that's about all it's been. I've been on the road ever since, sharing a lot of messages like we're going to share today. But probably my biggest disclaimer is, despite the fact that I've been sharing this conversation and so engaged in recruitment, retention of volunteer fire and EMS for so long, I don't claim to have any of the answers. I really don't. But what I do have is a lot of answers that have worked for a lot of other folks, answers that have worked for me and my own volunteer fire company in our large volunteer county system. And to back step just a little bit, I mentioned that I was responsible for the recruitment, training, operations in 97 fire departments. Only 3 of them were career, 2 are combination. The other 92 are 100% volunteer. Excuse me. We have no paid on call, we have no part-time, we have no remuneration for our volunteers. And while it's great that we have such a robust volunteer system, part of our challenge is there's very limited career opportunities, so there's no path to truly doing it for a living. And we lose a lot of great volunteer firefighters to a lot of other states, to the Marylands and the Virginias and the Carolinas and the southern states, and I'm sure even Tennessee as well. So it's a big challenge. But not only do I have answers from a lot of other folks to share with you, and just as Chief Love indicated, my goal is to not only share success stories, but share some unbelievably utter failures that I've also had in my time in the fire service. Because there's been some doozies, I'm not gonna lie. But I think that's just as important, because just because something didn't work for me doesn't mean that it couldn't work for you. So we're gonna share that. Probably the second part of the disclaimer is that opinions are like blank. Everybody has one. You can fill in your own blank. But understand that I'm very interested in hearing your opinions this afternoon. Understand that the opinions I share with you don't represent, well, I used to say my employer, but I fixed that problem. I don't have one of those anymore. But certainly any other organization I might be affiliated with, and obviously the only reason I have an opinion to share with you today as well, because my wife's not here right now. But you're going to hear me say that, use the phrase over and over, refer to this as a conversation, because I always say, despite the fact that I never learn as much as when I'm teaching, because it forces me to be on top of my game, I don't like to teach, I don't like to instruct, I don't even like to present. What I enjoy the most is simply having conversations with other people who are as passionate about what we do as I am. But for this to be a conversation, I can't be the only jamoke standing in the front of the room doing the talking. What do I need in return? No, really, this is the conversation part. What do I need in return? Someone to talk with? Response? Questions? Answers, opinions, feedback, insight, input, all of those things. So that's what this is going to be, is a conversation.
Can you explain to them what a jamoke is? Because a lot of them
you could insert your own self-deprecating term for, some schmo or some jerk who just stands up in the room and blah, 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 blah. Try not to be that. We just use the term jamoke. But the important thing you need to know about this conversation is that it's not my conversation. This is your conversation. I am very blessed and privileged to be invited into firehouses all over the United States and Canada, specifically for having these types of conversations. But despite that, I love it every single time that I have it, and I've had it now with hundreds of fire departments and literally thousands of firefighters. But this is your conversation. So that means 2 things. One, it's going to go as long and in whatever direction you want it to go. If we don't get off the first slide, I'm okay with that as long as you're okay with that. But ultimately, this is your conversation. And the other thing I do want to mention now, in case I forget to later, is thanks to Chief Phillips and to Jenny and Shakir, I'm going to email every one of you a direct link to a Dropbox full of recruitment and retention resources that some of which we'll discuss in this class, many we won't even get to, but things that you'll be able to utilize in your fire department. Okay? So is everybody ready to have a conversation? Yes. Excellent. As Chief Love talked about several times, he mentioned this need to do a 360, to do a size up. Well, we need to do a size up of our conversation and a size up of our volunteer fire service as it sits right now. And I found the best way to do that is to start with what I like to call some burning questions. Of all the roles, responsibilities, and responses that the fire service is pulled into, dragged into, kicked into, and sometimes we just jump into with both feet because we identify the need, What business are we in? Public service? Customer service? What else? What are some of those responses we go to today? We just go to fires now, right?
We're in the funnel business.
Right? In the funnel business? Not the fun business.
No, the funnel.
Funnel.
We basically take care of everything that nobody else takes care of.
Uh-huh.
It's funneled into one small area.
Okay, I like that term. We were having this conversation actually yesterday afternoon when we came and scoped out the room and so forth, and I shared some of my challenges and my frustration with why law enforcement was the slowest to adapt to and adopt the incident command system. I should probably ask that first. Are there any police officers in the room? Doesn't matter, I'm going to speak freely anyways. But who does law enforcement call when they can't figure out how to do something? The fire department, right? And like I said, I struggled with why they're so slow to adapt to and adopt the incident command system until it dawned on me not that long ago. If you think about it, 99% of the business a police officer does, they do as what? On their own as an individual, right? If they're lucky, they get to work with a partner, and some of them get to work as part of a specialized team. But in the fire service, we do 99% of our business as what? As a team, right? And when somebody steps away from the team and they act independently, what do we call that? Freelancing. And what do we do with freelancing? We discourage it, and sometimes as necessary, we discipline as a result of it. So if you think about it, it's simply not natural for them to work under a large umbrella organization like the incident command system. So, and it wasn't until I kind of had that aha moment of my own that I truly have an appreciation for the work that they do. But what are some of the other roles and responsibilities and responses that the fire service is involved in today? We go on medical calls, yeah. Pardon me?
You work recs, you direct traffic.
Okay. Chaplain, I like that. Rescue. What was the other item you said? Going to Rex and then what?
Directing traffic.
Directing traffic, yeah. One of my bucket list goals is to actually get to your Tennessee highway safety training facility that TDOT has put into place. I've seen pictures of it, heard about it, read about it. But aside from volunteer firefighter and EMS recruitment and retention, highway safety for first responders is probably my second biggest passion. So that's a big part of our job, right? Yeah. So the fire department just doesn't go to fires anymore. And who here, their fire department responds to EMS as well? Raise your hand. Okay, probably the large majority of you. Okay. And it really begs the question, are we fire departments who also provide EMS, or in most cases, are we really EMS providers who occasionally go to fires? Depending on the ratio of fire to EMS in your department, the answer might vary. I can tell you in my department, we're a bit of an anomaly. Most fire departments who also do EMS, the ratio of EMS to fire is sometimes 90-10, 85-15, 80-20 at best. We're almost 65-35, meaning 65% of our calls are EMS related, 35% are fire related, largely because we're literally in the center of town. So we don't get our own work, but we get to go on everybody else's. We also go as a fast team to several other towns and so forth. Okay? But at the core of everything we do, what business are we really in? Saving lives, serving the public, protecting property, all the standard answers, right? I would argue at the end of the day, what we really are in is the people business. Would you agree? Give me some form of acknowledgement. Raise your hand, nod your head, donkey nod, something like that. If you nod your head down, just remember to bring it back up, please. Okay? If you think about it, every single thing that we do in fire and emergency services is not only for people, but with people. Correct? Absolutely. Every single thing we do in fire and emergency services is both for people and with people. And we're going to talk about that with people part at length today. Chief Jack Snook in 1989, he was the chief of the Tualatin Valley, Oregon Fire Rescue Department, wrote what was long held to be not only the manual, but the Bible, if you will, on volunteer fire and EMS recruitment and retention. And honestly, many of the principles that Chief Snook had in that manual then will still hold true today, absent of maybe some of the changes that have come along ever since Al Gore invented the internet, right? So, but in the opening pages of that manual, he made this very bold statement, and by no means was he discrediting volunteers because he was one himself. But he said the problem with volunteers is that they're volunteers. The problem with volunteers is that they're volunteers. What do you think he meant by that?
They don't pursue it past volunteer work.
Say that for me again.
Most volunteers do not pursue it past volunteer work.
Okay, most volunteers don't pursue it past volunteer work, meaning making it a career choice as well. Okay? Any other opinions? Sir?
They have to take care of feeding their families, going to work, so the time they have is limited.
Okay. So they have other priorities that quite often take priority over their volunteering work, right? I have a kind of a theory that goes along with that. With few exceptions other than maybe Chief Phillips, all of us have a limited amount of disposable income, right? Except for, Chief Phillips. But just like we all have a limited amount of disposable income, we also all have a limited amount of disposable time. Those were the two different types of time that Chief Love spoke about in his conversation as well. So how we apply that time and where we apply that certainly comes into play. Any other opinions of what Chief Snook meant when he said the problem with volunteers is that they're volunteers? Here's where I think he was going with that. Basically what he was saying was that we have neither a paycheck to motivate them with, nor do we have a paycheck to compel them to act with. So absent of that paycheck to either motivate or compel them to act with, where does their motivation have to come from? From themselves, from inside, right? Right? Absolutely. And my whole premise, we may or may not get to tactics and strategies as it relates to recruitment and retention today, but this is an important part of the conversation. Because until I can change your hearts and your minds about the way that you look at both the challenges and the solutions that we face in today's volunteer fire service, no great strategy and no great tactic can save us. So that's really where I think he was going with it, and saying that in the absence of a paycheck to motivate or compel them to act with, that motivation has to come from within. It has to come from the heart. So let's talk this for a second, and we have our trusty assistant Jenny here, who's going to play my Vanna White for the day. And let's talk about some of the characteristics, traits, and attributes that we look for in today's volunteers. What are those? Integrity. And what's the Wikipedia definition of integrity? Honesty is a big part of it, right? Yeah. What's the traditional response? How you act when nobody's watching, right? That's kind of the textbook or the street definition of integrity. What else? What other characteristics, traits, and attributes? Drive, okay. Willingness to learn and determination. I love both of those. Honor. Desire. Pride. Duty. Okay.
Selflessness.
Selflessness. Love that. Courage. Respect. Excellent. Characteristics, traits, and attributes are what I commonly refer to them, lump sum them as we have some real characters and some real buttes in our firehouse, don't we? So let's talk about them. But what are those characteristics, traits, and attributes that we're looking for in today's volunteers? Passion. I love that. What's another word that sounds like passion? Compassion. That's an important part, right? What happens when we lose our caring and compassion in what we do? What is it time for? Probably either a boot or a reboot, right? And hopefully just a reboot will be enough and it can get us right back on the right path. Any others? Pardon me? Love? I love that. I don't think I've ever heard somebody have the courage to share that word as we built this list before. We're going to talk about brotherhood as it relates to retention specifically a little later in our conversation. And when I say the word brotherhood, I certainly mean that gender generically. Somebody charged me with removing the word brotherhood from my vocabulary. And they said you should just use family instead. Well, to me, brotherhood is so much deeper than that, and it has a totally different connotation to it. But I do use it gender generically, and I remind all of us that there is no such thing as brotherhood without her in it. Spell the word, okay? But my core definition of brotherhood, and I have several, and every time I think I have a good idea, I create these memes or posters and flyers, and you're going to have access to them as well. But my most fundamental definition of brotherhood is we don't necessarily have to like each other, but we do have to love each other, if only just a little bit. That's my basic definition of brotherhood. We don't have to like each other, but we are obligated to love each other just a little bit. And I'm going to touch on another word that you had said, and that is honor. Sure, now I won't be able to remember the name of the department. My office is located there. Hanover County, Virginia, their fire department definition of brotherhood is loyalty above all, except honor. Loyalty above all, except honor. Which basically says, when I take that oath of brotherhood, I will be loyal to you above all, except when one of us falls away and is no longer an honorable member of our team. Honor is the deal breaker, so that's a critical term, and thank you for bringing that up. Other characteristics, traits, attributes. Sir?
Commitment and accountability.
Commitment and accountability, two words that go hand in hand. Yep, absolutely. I like that. Any others? Yes. Discipline. And when you say that, you're talking about personal discipline, not the administrative discipline or anything of that nature, right? Yeah. Okay. Others? Tact. That's helpful. Yeah. I'm sure, don't yell out names, but I'm sure all of us know people in our lives who can't even spell the word tact when it comes to applying it, right? Yeah, okay. That's a good one. Humility. I love that. Perseverance. Now you see that list that we're building up there, characteristics, traits, and attributes? How many of your volunteer fire departments have job descriptions for your volunteers? Raise your hand. One or two, okay? In those job descriptions for whatever positions you have within your volunteer fire department, does it include these types of words that relate to the characteristics, traits, and attributes that we're looking for? And the reason I'm asking the question is, A, if you do not have job descriptions for your volunteers, that has an enormous impact on both recruitment and retention, and I encourage you to get some. And if you're looking for sources of them, Google volunteer firefighter job descriptions. And there's no limit of resources that are available out there. And if you can't find what you're looking for, reach out to me and I'll help you connect the dots. But if you also have job descriptions currently, I encourage you to look at adding some of these characteristics, traits, and attributes into those job descriptions. Because what is one word that kind of lumps all these words together? What do they really represent? The what of our organization or the what of our people? Culture is kind of it. Values, right? Are these not the core values of what a volunteer is today? Okay? And those are things that need to be entered into the conversation. I do another workshop. I've been doing it for 10 years now, which I cannot believe. I did it for 6 years straight at FDIC. It's titled From the Xbox to the Box Alarm, Understanding and Engaging Today's Firefighters. And it's specifically targeted for my generation to understand how to connect with your generation. But the one thing that I tell people, if you remember absolutely nothing else about our Xbox Live conversation, remember this one thing, that the greatest expectation of what I've dubbed this Xbox generation is to be given clear expectations. The greatest expectation of this generation is to be given clear expectations. So that means a couple of things. Because I told you so simply doesn't work anymore. It really doesn't. Take it out of your vocabulary, take it out of your repertoire of trying to get your point across. But specifically with this generation, just the fact that I told you so is also not enough. They want to see it in writing, they want to see it documented, and yes, they do need frequent and positive reinforcement of what those expectations are. So as we're building those job descriptions and we're building training paths and educational paths and advancement paths, we want those expectations to be clear, but I'm pretty sure they all start with some form of this list that we've just built together as part of a team, of those core values that we're looking for in today's volunteers. So let's go to the big board and see how you did in comparison to the most frequent popular answers that I have heard before. I don't think we touched on intelligent or street smart. Is there a difference between the two? Yeah, absolutely. What's another term for street smart? Common sense, and it's not quite as common as we'd like it to be today, right? That's a big argument that I hear often, okay? Caring and compassionate, we touched on that. Is it necessary to be physically fit or tough in today's fire service? Yeah. And I think even a better term for that is simply healthy. You know, believe it or not, there was a time in my life when I was referred to as skinny, and I was always offended by that. I said I much more prefer athletically slender. Of course, that's not really accurate either, but I still try to stay healthy nonetheless. Is there a difference between being physically fit and being tough? Sure, you could have somebody who looks to be in great shape, but if they don't have endurance and capacity and things of that nature, they may not have that physical toughness. And what's the other toughness that we really need in today's fire service? Mental toughness, right? Absolutely, and that's another area that I'm very focused on in our fire service today. Dependable and dedicated, I think we touched on. Is a sense of humor handy in the fire service? Oh yeah, absolutely, right? Probably our greatest survival tool, right? Yeah, for sure. And the sense of humor that we use in the firehouse is sometimes not the most appropriate, is it? The most common term, and I'm sure there are others, but the most common term I hear that refers to the kind of humor that we use, the stories we would tell in this room but never outside of it, because they'd either lock us up or lock us out, one or the other. But that dark humor, right? And we'll talk about the appropriate and inappropriate use of dark humor as well. Is there a difference between being a good leader and being a good follower? Absolutely. Dr. Harry Carter in 1989 wrote an article for Firehouse Magazine titled, "Are You a Good Follower?" And in it, he talks about this premise that just like the firefighter, just like the fire chief has a job to do, so does the firefighter. And I love those memes and those images of, on Facebook and other forms of social media where it's a officer in a white shirt and they've got a brush in their hand and they're washing the apparatus, and people say, now that's a real leader, leading from the front, leading by example. And I agree with all of that. But if the reason the officer in the white shirt is washing the apparatus is because some firefighter didn't, then we have an issue, okay? And in Dr. Harry Carter's article, "Are You a Good Follower?" he talks about that concept that just like the firefighter, the chief has a job to do as well. And if the chief is doing the job of the firefighter, what is the chief also not doing? The chief's job, right? Or the officer, insert name, rank, and title here, okay? So that's something that we need to be aware of as well. Community conscious and technologically sound. Is technologically sound just the burden or the opportunity or the obligation of people in this generation? Or is technologically sound a requirement of all of us in this room? If you're still referring to yourself as technologically illiterate, that's a literacy issue we need to work on, because the fire service is already a high-tech industry and needs to be addressed as such. And wouldn't it be great if we could just go down to the firefighter store and grab a firefighter off the shelf, pick out the color of the gear and, give me 3 truckies and an engine crew or something like that. But it's not that simple. So we have to think in terms of recruitment and retention, where do we find people who embody this list of characteristics, traits, and attributes that we're looking for? And the reality is there's a lot more of them. And you touched on a lot of those as well. And these are compiled from going through this exercise over and over again. So here's my next burning question for you. I normally say 95% of, or some majority thereof, the fires we fight are A, on the fire ground, or B, in the firehouse. Who says A? Yeah, I didn't think so. Like I shared earlier, I've shared this conversation now with thousands of firefighters across the U.S. Nobody has ever once answered A. This is an important point of consensus in our conversation, our growth today, that if we are in agreement that 95% of the fires, at least the proverbial fires we fight, are in the firehouse, not on the fire ground, then riddle me this. Why is it that we invest all of our time, our energy, and especially our money in the exact opposite proportion on all the things that we know to be 100% useless without the proper quantity and quality of people to make it work? Why is it that we can apply an adapt and overcome attitude to absolutely anything that the customer can think to throw at us, but when it comes to those fires in the firehouse, we stick our head in the sand and hope the problem goes away? Why is that? It's personal. Some people don't like confrontation. I'll tell you a funny story about that. I made that same comment a couple of years ago when I had the opportunity to keynote the International ARF Working Group Conference in Atlanta, Airport Rescue and Firefighting. And I started down this road in this conversation of the fires in the firehouse and why we don't address those versus the one on the fire ground. And I said in a very bold voice, I said, after all, who here likes conflict, right? 20 United States Marines in uniform all raised their hands at the same time. It derailed me for a second, but then I said, you're right, you're great at it, and please keep up the great work at it. Right. Yeah. So that's a great response because people don't like conflict, confrontation. Why else?
Sometimes you don't have any control over making the changes that are necessary.
Okay, so sometimes you don't have, or you don't at least feel like you have control over making changes as necessary. Okay. Okay, so it could be confrontation with a higher rank, and that could sometimes not bode well for you, right? Yeah. They could refer to that little career dissipation light in the corner of your eye dissipating, right? Help me out. What movie is that quote from? Backdraft. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Any other reasons? Any other thoughts on that?
All of our history and training is fireground stuff. That's what you get coming up, fireground.
Right. All of our training that we provide to people is based on the fires on the fire ground. And we're starting to get into it, but we still have a long way to go of really teaching human resources related management and leadership courses and training in the fire service. If you look at a catalog of a state academy, county academy, whatever the case may be, and you look at the percentage of tactical fireground or incident scene training versus back office training, if you will, there's quite a bit of disparity, right? Riddle me this. What if we changed that relationship and we invested more of our time and our energy and maybe even just a little bit of our money in some opposite proportion on addressing those fires in the firehouse? Could things on the fire ground get better? Yeah. Why? What would be the outcomes? Work better together. What do we call that? Brotherhood, teamwork. Okay. What else? Trust. Excellent. Critical to everything we do. Okay, we can become a better follower in hopes of making our officers better leaders, right? Yeah. Yeah, going back to this concept of why we don't address those fires in the firehouse, you think about it, and you mentioned it, it's very personal, right? Yeah. It's ugly, it's messy, it's sticky, it's muddy. They're uncomfortable conversations. But would you agree if we started having more of those uncomfortable conversations, if we started actually focusing on preventing or as quickly as possible quelling those fires in the firehouse, that life on the fire ground could get better, right? We're in agreement on that. Excellent. That's an important point of consensus because you need to know that I'm going to hold you accountable to that point of consensus throughout the balance of our conversation today. So let's move on to a couple of other things. We go from the size up stage to the investigation stage, or in our terms, using cause and origin. And I'm just going to insert some videos in the middle of this just to get you thinking about.
ECC and Erie County's volunteer firefighters are working together to educate and protect Western New York. We're more than 5,000 strong. With you, we can be strong. Contact your local volunteer fire department or visit ivolunteerfire.org to learn more today.
It's a little video that I created and produced for our county volunteer fire service. We had one for every season pretty much, and we would integrate them into our marketing efforts. But what was the focus, what was the theme of that particular recruitment video? Teamwork, right? Yep, on and off the field, and that's going to be an important part of our conversation. So what I want to go through now is a little exercise I call a recruitment and retention assessment center. On the name tents that I handed out for you, you have the framework for doing this yourself. You can do it there or just right on the back white side of that piece of paper, however you want to do it. But one of the things I encourage you to do is go back to your fire station, to your fire department, to your fire service, and localize this. go through this process. And because our focus is going to be on specifically retention, we're going to spend a little time in the don't join and join area, but we're really going to focus on the stay and don't stay area. So with the help of Jenny, who's going to capture our ideas, give me 3 reasons why people don't join the volunteer fire service. No time. No pay. Okay. No sense of community on their part. Okay.
Not for me.
Not for me, or at least that's what they think, right? Yeah. Okay.
Just for firefighting or medical.
Okay. Out of shape, so physical limitations. Okay. Others?
I think part of it goes back to the fires in the firehouse. If they see conflict, they avoid it.
Okay. So perhaps we have a bad public image that we need to deal with? Sure. Yes? Being told you can't do it. Slash fear, okay. Yeah, if that's the message your local or somebody's local volunteer fire department is sending, and they wonder why they're not getting people in, I have 2 words for those folks. Good luck. Right? Why else do people not join? What are the standard answers?
That's the buck. I'm not going to do it.
Okay. No buy-in? Okay, lack of information or awareness, right? That's a key one.
I've been told there's too much required training.
Too much required training, okay? And I don't know the training requirements specifically to your state, but if this were an OSHA-approved chair, I would get up on my soapbox right now and share with you my theory that there is no such thing as training requirements. There are only training needs. And that is the training we need to do our job, do it proficiently, do it safely, and do it for the right reasons and the people that we're sworn to serve. Chief Love, his phrase was, don't make training what? A dirty word, right? And I can tell you this, from my position in leading a large contingent of volunteers and also being directly engaged on local and state and national levels, specifically to recruitment and retention, I am personally sick and tired of news articles and TV interviews and radio interviews and social media posts that talk about the opportunities for people to get engaged in volunteer fire and emergency services, and they lead with all the reasons people aren't joining. They're giving them the answers to the exam. They're planting the seeds in their mind as to why it is not achievable, instead of leading with all the benefits, tangible and intangible. Okay? Why else are people not joining?
Apathy, don't care.
Say that again?
Apathy.
Apathy? Mm-hmm. I can't even spell apathy and I don't care. Right? Yep. It's a dangerous job, sure. So there is a fear factor associated with that. Yep. Okay. So of those reasons why people don't join, which one of those would you say, and I don't see it there, Jenny. Oh, actually it is right at through the line there. Which one of those is both probably our biggest challenge, but the easiest to address and attack as quickly as possible? The information and awareness part, right? Yeah. That's the marketing campaign, that's the awareness, that's the door-to-door, or it's the open houses or whatever public events you look to take advantage of. I have a stock phrase, I don't include it in because we're not getting specifically to the recruitment side of it, but it starts with an attitude, and our attitude needs to be to treat every single public interaction as a public service, public education, public relations, and a recruitment opportunity. The awareness is always our biggest challenge, but it's also the easiest that we can address, and we have to address it early and often. Okay? So let's go on to why people do join. What are the positives? They want to help. Brotherhood. The bond. A belonging, sense of belonging. Excellent. Okay, stepping stone, career path. To get the training, yeah. Maybe learn new life skills is also as a result of that. Excellent. Pardon me? The thrill, sure, the excitement, right? The enthusiasm, the adrenaline rush, right? That's why I'm, a run to the curb kid. Right. Okay. But talking about the thrill and the excitement, and some people argue that we should stop selling that. Because, picking up the same lift assist at 3 o'clock in the morning for the last 3 nights is not terribly thrilling or exciting. But that's a large majority of what we do. But I think that's really doing a discredit, because much of the thrill of what we do is our opportunity to help others, right? And that's the thrill and the excitement that we take away. It may not be the stuff movies are made of, but it's still some level of thrill and excitement and satisfaction. Whoop, I'm sorry. Okay, other reasons people join.
Serving their community.
Okay. That's the textbook answer that most people would give you, right? And that's a good one. Tradition, family tradition. Yep, big part of it. Yep.
Right on the big red fire truck.
Okay, BRTs, yep, that goes along with the thrill and the excitement, for sure. Yep. Love for their community, right? That's the right reason to do that. Stand by. At least it was only a microphone malfunction and not a wardrobe malfunction. All right. Other reasons people join? Childhood dream, run to the curb kids, right? Yep. Absolutely, love it.
Ego.
Pardon me?
Ego.
Ego, sure. Yep. Do we have some people in our fire service who are part of it and seek to attain certain positions and ranks and titles because they probably know in their own mind that they could never achieve something similar in other aspects of their life? Yeah, okay. But in those instances, the fire service is about who? It's about them, right? Yeah. And that's a problem. Okay. Okay, that's a pretty good list of why people join. Now let's go to the other side of the map. Why do people stay in the volunteer fire service? Camaraderie. Pardon me?
Love of the job.
Love of the job. Excellent. Pride in what they do. Purpose. Gives them a sense of purpose. Yeah. Ownership. I like that. Yeah. Gives them ownership in their community, ownership in their own life, ownership in protecting their family. Yep.
A different sense of love.
Different sense of love, sure. Yep.
Sense of accomplishment.
Sense of accomplishment. Excellent. Personal rewards. The ability to push and stretch themselves, excellent. Yep. Challenge, yep, that's good. Learning new skills.
Just like you were talking about with the veterans coming back, it gives them a chance to have a sense of structure they had in the military.
Okay, so that sense of structure and organization, if you will. Yep. Chain of command. And I'm going to throw out another little Xbox tidbit because one of the other driving factors that I drive home in that conversation is for a long time, we in my generation and others have simply broad brush labeled, painted all of them as basically unmotivated slackers, right? I mean, is that not the stereotype of today's generation? Appropriate or inappropriate? And I won't discount the fact that in certain instances, that is a very inappropriate characterization of people in that generation. But in my own observational research, in my experience, especially spending time in firehouses all over the country with a lot of very promising and enormously capable young people, my whole purpose for the Xbox conversation is to take us away from solely looking at them as unmotivated slackers to what I've seen many, if not most of them, truly to be is starved for strong, effective leadership. But in many cases, if you think about it, in their defense, they didn't get it at home because they had friends instead of parents. They didn't get it in school because we've managed to strip teachers and administrators of every right and authority to impart discipline and respect. So when they get to our paramilitary firehouse door, it's not only a rude awakening for us, it's a rude awakening for them as well. But if you get a sense that somebody coming to your firehouse door is looking for that structure, that stability in their life, focus on that, give them that, and identify them as somebody who has the potential and the desire for strong, effective leadership. Excellent. Give me one more just so that our lists are even. I would hate to walk away with more reasons people don't join than they stay. Sense of duty. Okay, very good. Now, why don't they stay? Poor leadership. Darn kids. Right. Life. Yep. Time constraints. You had something else? Morale. Strife and infighting. Poor structure. Lack of organization. Waste of time. Excellent. Burnout. PTSD. Figured out it wasn't for them, right? Yep. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, is it? Now, what also could go hand in hand with that to keep them engaged? Is it possible we could find another part of what we do that could be for them? Yeah. Sure. And we're going to explore that a little deeper in just a little bit. Okay. Why else don't people stay? Family issues?
Department issues, favoritism.
Favoritism, yep. Has anybody here done or do exit interviews with volunteers that leave service? Working on it? All right, good. I encourage you to do so. It's a tough situation because by the time they're leaving, and if it's because of many of the reasons we've listed here, are they in the mood to be open and honest with you? Maybe, maybe not. You know, they just want to walk away and they don't want to discuss it anymore. But I can tell you this, there is nothing worse you could possibly do than to conduct an exit interview with somebody who leaves your volunteer fire department and then either discount or downplay or discredit their chief complaints, or worse, then never implement any positive changes as a result of what they shared with you. You're better off never asking them in the first place and just letting them ride off into the sunset. Okay? Other reasons people leave? Okay, relocation. And housing affordability is an issue as well. Yeah, we have parts of our county where young people grow up in the fire service, they grow up in their house, they go off to college, and they can't afford to move back into the house they grew up in. Yeah. So they've lost that sense of belonging? Yep. Okay. Change in leadership. Okay. Okay, career advancement. That gets lumped under the life category, right? Yep. All right, let's hold up there. What I want you to do, and the reason for going through this exercise, is it forms the foundation for the rest of our conversation. And again, we're only going to primarily focus on why people stay and why they don't stay. But when you go back and do this exercise locally in your own department or your own fire service, what I encourage you to do is in each column, look at what are the threats or the conditions in this particular column that I truly, really believe I have no control in changing or improving. And simply cross them off and cut your losses. And then what I want you to do is I want you to look at that same list of remaining conditions and say, what if I invested just a little time and energy, and yeah, maybe even just a little money, could be a low-hanging fruit solution to make incremental, immediate, or significant change and improvement in our abilities to recruit or retain. Circle those and go to town on them as quickly as possible with a sense of urgency. Figure out what it is you're doing right, focus on that, and do more of it, do it more often, and look for ways you can improve that. And go through each of those columns, go through the same process, cross over the things that you think you have no impact on, no chance of changing. You know, the reality is, you know, certain socioeconomic conditions in our community, the fire department is not in the best position to change everything about that, right? So as a result, some of the outcomes are going to be very predictable, and we're going to have very little impact or involvement in those outcomes. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when at that point, okay? Cut your losses, figure out the low-hanging fruit, and then look at the remaining conditions and say, what incremental changes can I make? What's in our wheelhouse? What is achievable that if we make some longer-term investments of time and energy and maybe money, we can improve our opportunities for survival and success in our volunteer fire department or our volunteer fire service. That's a process, that's a framework, that's your assessment center of your recruitment and retention challenges and solutions. And they're all right there laid out for you. I'm going to suggest that we take a 5-minute break. Share with you a brief story, because I'm pretty much a storyteller by trade. My wife says I embellish, but I've told her a million times, don't exaggerate. It was a joke, a little math joke there. I grew up in a neighborhood where we had 21 kids across 3 households. I'm the youngest of 8. Lattimore's next door had 9. And the Milks family next door to them we called the poor family because they only had 4 kids. But that's okay because we lent them kids all the time. But interestingly enough, only the 3 youngest sons in each of those families got involved in the fire service, despite the fact that we all grew up around the corner from the Evans Center Volunteer Fire Company. And when I was of age about 14, the chief of our fire company at the time, anytime the siren went off, would pull to the corner of our street and pick us up and take us on fire calls. Well, here was my dilemma. He only had room for 2 of the 3 of us on the bench seat of his pickup truck, and I lived the furthest away. Well, my friend John Lattimore, I showed you his image earlier, he hadn't lost his baby fat yet, so I could outrun him. And then my good friend Doug Milks is an Ojibwa Indian, and as he will tell you, he's on Indian time all the time. So I had no trouble outrunning him. But fast forward, actually as a result of that, and him picking us up and taking us on so many calls, and of course, us doing more than we were supposed to, for their protection and our protection, they actually created junior firefighters in my volunteer fire company, and I was my department's first ever junior volunteer firefighter. That was 37 years ago, and obviously you take one look at me and you realize I started when I was -7. But that chief, Jim Genetti, is still driving us to fire call because he's the primary driver on our apparatus. So I love nothing more than when our crew consists of Jim Genetti behind the wheel, myself or John or Doug as the officer, and the other two making up the crew. So that's where I talk about me being a run-to-the-curb kid, and so many people, when I share what a run-to-the-curb kid is about, I kind of see the light go on for them, and they say, yeah, I was, or actually I still am a run-to-the-curb kid, because of, we heard sirens right now, we probably have our noses pressed against the glass and checking it out. We came to some important points of consensus early on in our conversation, and I remind you again, we're going to hold you to accountable to them, but we're going to delve further into, for a little bit, of how we found ourselves in the situation we're in, and it's important to realize that so we know how to get ourselves out of it. And I think a lot of it has to do with going back to this fires in the firehouse versus fires on the fire ground. This concept and this relationship between those two fires, and the fact that we invest all of our time, our energy, and especially our money on the things that we know to be 100% useless without the proper quantity and quality of people to make them work. All those things, if you will, are what I lump under one term, and that is widgets. They're the widgets of the fire service. Has the jaws of life ever pried somebody out of a car by itself? No. What does it take? It takes people to operate, right? Have we invented a fire engine that puts a fire out by itself? Not quite. I mean, those ARF trucks with a single joystick controller are pretty cool, and we're getting close, but we're not quite there yet. And even when we talk about resuscitating somebody, somebody still has to apply the thumper, right, or the automatic CPR device in modern terms. It still takes people to do all of that. And for so long we focused on the widgets of the fire service and ignored the real value of the fire service, and that is our people. We came to consensus, what business are we in? The people business. Therefore, what is our greatest asset? People. And what do we have to work the hardest to protect? Our people. Absolutely. We kind of started to touch on this use of appropriate and inappropriate use of dark humor, if you will. I often say, just like fire can be used as a tool, but also a toy, so to speak, for some people, that dark humor, if you will, can also be used as a tool, as a compensating mechanism for helping us mask and recover from, quite honestly, some of the things that we're exposed to that no human being should ever have to be exposed to. And that's okay, and it works in that regard, and that's the stories we share and how we relive those moments where we were faced with significant stress. But when the inappropriate use of dark humor and that characterization of how we treat each other becomes the norm instead of the exception, it can be problematic, it can be cancerous, and it can become toxic in our firehouse environments. And that's when I refer to that inappropriate use of dark humor in those stories as WMDs, or weapons of membership destruction. So we're going to talk about some of those things, and what it really to me comes down to is one of the documents you'll have access to in the Dropbox I'm going to send you the link to, requires us to establish a baseline for human relations, human interactions in our firehouse. And that baseline is, I promise that I will treat you at least as well as I would treat a stranger meeting them on the street for the first time. But do we always treat each other that well? let's put it in context. If we were to treat a stranger meeting them on the street for the first time the same way that we treat each other, what might be some of the outcomes of that encounter? Yeah, you're laughing, right? Yeah. Probably either a funeral or a lawsuit or something thereof, right? Yeah. And the analogy I use, especially in the volunteer fire service, is let's say one of your members has been away from the firehouse for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or longer. Excuse me. And the first time they return for a response or a meeting or a training or just to come to the firehouse, do we greet them with open arms, hug them, and welcome them back? Or what's a more typical response we might offer? Where have you been? Who are you? Can I give you a tour? Can I get you an application? Hey, thanks for stopping by. Are you lost? Do you need directions? And those are the polite responses, are they not? Right. But there's two problems associated with that scenario. What's the first one? It can be taken wrong, but what's the first problem in that scenario? What's been keeping them away for 60, 90, 120 days or more, right? And if we as brother and sister firefighters, as we as fellow members, and most importantly, if we as fire service leaders have no clue as to what's been keeping someone away from your firehouse for 60, 90 days or more, whose problem is that? That's ours, right? That's a leadership issue, and that's truly a brotherhood issue. And that's problem number one, that we have no clue as to what it was that was keeping them away. It could have been any one of those items on that laundry list of why people don't stay or why they don't join. What's the second part of the second problem of that encounter, of that scenario? What if we greet them in our typical fashion, sarcastic, smart, blank, right, and so forth? Is there a chance that we may never ever see them again? Yeah. If A, we don't care enough to even find out what it was keeping them away during the period they were away, and then the very first time they're reintroduced into our firehouse culture, you know, they're all but shunned or belittled or whatever the case may be, there's a real good chance that we may never see them again. So I want to introduce you to a concept that I've had in my mind for a long time, but never just hadn't come up with the right way to present it to firefighters so that they could understand it. Just like we face a fiscal cliff in our economy at virtually any time, I've long felt that we've been facing and dealing with, and now dealing with the aftermath of a retention cliff in our volunteer fire service. And I want to share this with you, the story of the Acme Volunteer Fire Department, because obviously this is strictly a hypothetical situation. We would never do these types of things, and we would never treat people this way. So using the story of Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, anybody not seen that cartoon? Okay, good. So at least we know where we're starting from. We start out with Wile E. Coyote promising volunteer firefighter, have fire, we'll travel. That's all of us as run to the curb kids, right? That's all of us with that excitement and enthusiasm that we came to the fire service with. And we show up at the fire department and we're given this promise of achievable expectations. Yeah, it's a lot, it takes a lot, there's a fair amount of training and we have participation requirements, but it's achievable, you can do it. And we meet the Roadrunner, who on the outside looks like a nice enough bird, right? And he says, "Welcome to the fire department." And we don't know enough whether to trust him or not, but okay, we're the trusting type, so we're going to do that. And we say to the prospective member, "Commit yourself to the fire department, and we will always look out for you." We say those types of things, and we say, "Welcome," and start climbing, and let's get you some training and climbing, and then you get some training under your belt and you start to take on responsibility. You kind of start to find your pace and your place in your fire service. And now with that training and that responsibility, you're getting some experience under your belt, and there's this officer there, you know, Chief Roadrunner, who's saying, okay, turn it up a notch, let's go, let's really take it on, and I've got a lot more responsibility I want to give you, and a lot more workload, and we're driving you towards this path of advancement. And then for some reason, we start to slow down. We get a little cautious. Something happens in our life that causes our participation to start to fade, if only just a little bit, or there's a blip in the radar, or a blip in the EKG. And we get asked, why are you slowing down? Why are you taking less training? Why are you taking less responsibility? Why are you showing up less? What happens? The term you folks use was life gets in the way, right? I could do an entire class just using Paul Combs' cartoons, and a dear friend of mine, and this one really is a great depiction of everything we have to deal with in the volunteer fire service. It's truly a juggling act, and it's a high wire act. But most of us who are in it for the right reasons, we still, despite all these challenges and all this burden and adding on, we still try to cling on. But then, Roadrunner starts looking a lot more like the Tasmanian devil and asking us why we're slowing down. And our attitude back towards the fire department changes as well. And we all know how this story ends, right? What we're facing. And despite even our best efforts to cry out for help and say, listen, if you can just give me a little more time, or you know, maybe give me a different role, or I can fit in somewhere else, or I'll try my best, or you know, put me on probation and I'll make up for what I missed. We try to hang on. That path towards advancement starts to fade from our future. We're clinging to it. And then we get feedback like this: we always knew you'd never amount to much, right? Tell me that's not the conversations that have been going on in our volunteer firehouses when, after a review of somebody's participation, it starts to drop off for whatever reasons. Do we look at the value and the contributions they've made throughout their entire history? Or do we take an attitude of, what have you done for me lately? And despite those efforts to hang on, we know what we're looking at the bottom, and we say goodbye. And it's almost as if we had wrote the book on fire department mismanagement, right? Welcome them in with open arms. They're the shiny new penny. You know, we invest all this time and energy and training and emphasis on them. We insist they train, take on additional responsibility, gain experience, and as soon as that participation starts to fade, we don't help them fall off the cliff. We push them there, and this is what we end up with, right? Wile E. Coyote, disgruntled volunteer firefighter, have audience will badmouth the fire department. I'm pretty sure that's the bad public image we talked about as to why people don't join, and also affects us as to why they don't stay. And just to be clear, there are actually fire departments in the United States named the Acme Fire Department. This is no reflection on them, okay? Let's break it down a little further. We have this retention cliff, and I break down the demographics of the fire service into these four major categories: 14 to 18, 18 to 25, 25 to 40, and 40 plus. And I refer to 14 to 18 as the future of our fire service. How many departments here have some form of a youth program? Junior firefighters, cadets, explorers, okay? If you don't, I encourage you to do so. If you're not investing in your youth, you are not investing in your future. We have an Explorer program now in my department. In the last 20 to 25 years, at least one, And in many instances, all 3 of our chiefs came from the Explorer ranks. When I was a chief, all 3 of us came from those ranks, and currently 2 of our 3 chiefs came from those ranks in our structure today. 18 to 25 is the backbone of the fire service. It's still a young person's job physically. 40 plus I refer to as the knowledge base. And what do you think I refer to as the age period between 25 and 40? What's that? Leader base? I refer to it as the lost years. What happens in the age range between 25 and 40, typically with most people? Life, exactly. Theoretically, a time of significant personal and professional development. That's a good thing, right? Yeah. It's a good thing until it affects who? The fire department, and then it's a bad thing, right? I won't lie. I know of fire chiefs and officers who have talked young people out of advancing their careers selfishly to keep them in town and keep them engaged in our volunteer fire service. That's sad. What a discredit to the fire service and themselves as well. So if we overlay this 4 demographics of the fire service with years of experience, tell me if this describes your volunteer fire department. You have hopefully a stable cadre of people with 15 years of experience and up, and hopefully a growing component of people with 5 years of experience and under, but in the 5 to 15 years of experience range, you're real lean. Does that describe your fire department? It describes mine. It describes a lot of volunteer fire departments I deal with. Do you know why? Because of the effect of the retention cliff. Because of the lost years. Because as we go up along this trajectory, working our way to the top of our organization, when life gets in the way, everything else starts to fade off, and something has to give. And not only is it a means of breaking it down, but it breaks down the fire service. Because we've taken this attitude that it's all or nothing. It's 150% or 0. Let me ask you this. When you get to the point in your career in the volunteer fire service, and maybe your participation level, your training, the amount of training you take, the number of responses you go to starts to fade off. Do you immediately forget every single thing you've ever learned about fire and emergency services? I don't think so, right? You've taken an incredible amount of time to build up value. Value to yourself, value to your volunteer fire department, and value to your community. But do we build a rope bridge for you to the other side? No, we don't. We get you to the edge, and we don't just nudge you or guide you. We, boom, kick you over the edge. And the body count at the bottom of this cliff is significant. How many people have joined your volunteer fire department in the last 5 years? Somebody give me a number. How many? No, I'm not asking if you have. How many people have joined your volunteer fire department in the last 5 years? I'm not going to, 4, 15. Well, give me 20. 20 over here, 25. 25? Okay. How many people have left your volunteer fire department in that same time? More or less? Okay. Some derivative thereof. Maybe you're still, holding your own, maintaining a fair amount of retention. Maybe you're not. We had a time in my volunteer fire department where we lost more people than we were bringing in. And if you ever read my, resume or introduction online, one of the things that you'll hear in my biography, that's the word I was looking for, excuse me, is that I created a recruitment campaign that doubled the size of our membership. In 1990, John Lattimore, that jamoke in the photobombing image, was chief of our department at 25 years old and asked me to go to a county-wide recruitment meeting and come back with some ideas. I went to the first meeting. There were about 75 people in the room. I came back from that meeting. I put together a 15-page field action plan as to how we were going to recruit 5 new members and bring 5 inactive members back to active duty over the next 12 to 18 months. Pretty conservative goals, right? Manageable, achievable, or so we thought. We failed miserably. Instead, what we did was we doubled our membership from 45 to 90 members in 4 months' time. Crazy, isn't it? Amazing numbers. And I'll save you the bother of asking me, but how many of those people are still in your department today? Because the answer is 0. But in our defense, it took us a good 10 years to get rid of them all. And I say that half jokingly, because if you think about it, using modern ICS terms, if you look at the organizational structure of a volunteer fire department, it's pretty much a pyramid, right? We doubled the width of the base of our pyramid. Our span of control got out of control. We didn't have the middle management in place. We didn't have the logistics to support twice as many people. We were 30 of everything short. And over the course of that 10 years, our pyramid inverted and imploded. What an enormous waste of human resources. Now, in our defense, nobody, including myself, could have ever predicted that level of success. But it was the most valuable life lesson and the most valuable recruitment and retention lesson, because what it taught us was that we focused on quantity and not on quality. And as a result of it, again, there was that enormous waste. But the reality is we need to build that rope bridge to the other side. We need to give them an avenue, a means that if you can't give us 100%, what can we do with the 75 or 60% that you can give us? How can we make good use of it? How can we keep you in a position of contributing to our organization in whatever form and whatever that looks like, in hopes of when you get to the other side of 25 to 30, 30 to 35, 35 to 40, maybe it's a family situation where the first kid is old enough to watch the younger kids. Maybe it's because your mindset has changed and you want to reconnect with your community. Or heck, maybe you're just looking for an excuse to get out of the house at that point. We don't really care what the motivation is, but we also know that if we don't build that rope bridge to the other side and we push you off that cliff, how many of those folks ever come back to your volunteer fire department? 0 to none, right? They had such a bad experience that it ended their career of giving back in the form of the volunteer fire service. And that's when we end up with.
That's all, folks.
That's why we're in the situation we are in modern day volunteer fire service, because that retention cliff, we've been doing it wittingly or unwittingly, purposely or unpurposely, whatever your motivation was, but that's why we're at the situation that we're at. And for a long time we got away with it because there were more people at the front end of the pipeline, right? When we got somebody where they were never going to amount to much anyways, right? We could afford to lose them because there was somebody else new coming in the door, another new shiny penny. But how quickly, at what rate are those shiny pennies coming to your door today? They're not knocking it down, are they? We have to go out and get them. We have to look for ways to recruit them, and we have to improve our capability of retaining them as well. Do you agree, disagree with my retention cliff theory? Anybody care to argue it, debunk it? Have another theory of why we're in the situation we're in? Again, it's the simplest way I could come up with of demonstrating in a way that we could all understand. So that's pretty much the entire problem phase of our equation in our conversation. But we learned several things from it. What business are we in? What's our most important asset? What do we have to protect the most? Our people. Therein lies the key to our solution. So now we're going to talk about rekindling that passion and retooling our retention efforts.
I've been a member here, Pikesville Volunteer Fire Department, since December. Still learning, still growing, so happy to be a part of it. It's a great experience, something that I don't want to trade up.
Everyone's really interested in training, getting better at what they do. And when I first got here, that was the first impression I got. Guys welcomed me, they just threw me out into the training environment. It's amazing to be part of a group that is so committed to being better and being the best that they can be.
It's been really awesome. They're really open to training you, and they really want you to get through the process. You can come to the station whenever you want to try to get as much experience, and they have training days every month, so it's really easy to get caught up.
There's a lot of people from all over the country. I myself am from Washington State. You come here, you meet tons of people from all walks of life, all parts of the country, some people from other countries even. I think that's a really cool experience. It's a good social experience going to the station.
We have a big live-in program. A lot of the guys that staff our station live at the fire station, and they work really hard and spend a lot of their time there. So it's really important that they have a home away from home to come to. Having a new fire station is going to make a big difference for them.
The biggest benefit will be just having a state-of-the-art facility, which allow us to train better, allow us to recruit more members, to have more space for more people to better serve the community.
And we are really excited to be able to provide everything that we need to provide to the community using this new firehouse that we're going to be building in the next few years.
I think the new station really represents the growth of this department. It's just always new volunteers joining, and I just really think like a new building signifies that growth, that we are, as one, just getting stronger.
If you're interested in any way, shape, or form in volunteering or just being a part of your community, consider being a volunteer firefighter at EMT. It's very rewarding, it's extremely fun, and you have an opportunity to get to meet various individuals from different walks of life who are all here for the same common goal, which is to better serve the community. So if you have any interest, visit our website, look for anybody in uniform, and learn more about what we do.
What do you think? It's a cool video, right? What was the focus of that video? What were some of the key points that they emphasized here? Different people, so diverse backgrounds, diversity, training. Anybody can volunteer. Yep. Flexible, family, brotherhood, a lot of great messages in that. How many responses does your department go to every year? Total? 200? Anybody else? Throw out some numbers. 600? 1,000? 400? Okay. How many? 1,200? Okay. My department, Evans Center, we went to a lucky 666 alarms last year. We do fire and EMS. It's actually down. We had about 840 the year before, but we also had a major storm. And we're 100% volunteer. Hyattsville in Maryland, first ring suburb outside of Washington, D.C., averages about 6,000 runs a year. And I don't know, I think the current number of live-in firefighters is about 18. They go to more reported fires than I think my department goes on calls. But great opportunity to get great at what they do, great experience, and a lot of their firefighters see a career path to go on to career departments, DC, Baltimore, New York City, and so on and so forth. So, but again, going back to the message of what did they emphasize, where was the focus? It was on family, it was on training, it was on that camaraderie, and bringing all of those pieces together. So we're going to dig a little deeper. We're going to break it down, so to speak, but to look at just the retention part of it is not enough. We need to look at the big picture, and what I've created is what I call a volunteer life cycle. And I encourage you to do this in your own department. Another process and exercise you can go through, it's on the back of your name placard there. It kind of gives you those steps and you can fill in the blanks. But map out every single step in your inquiry, application, interview, onboarding process, probationary period, training, retention, and retirement. Look at how long that takes for your average volunteers. Look at where in the process you're losing people, both in which part of the map are they falling off the grid, but also how much service do they have in, how much experience do they have in, and what is the quantitative and qualitative value of what they brought together at that time when you lose them, and what are your losses. So we have to look at the big picture, look at the process. It starts with a needs assessment. And a little background on myself. I spent 15 years in engineering, sales, and marketing management before I threw away a perfectly lucrative career to instead do what I love and make my life in the fire service. 20 years ago, when Erie County came to me and offered me the opportunity to be the deputy fire coordinator. And I had I had a boss for 12 years to the day, who every single day he said one thing to me, and it drove me absolutely nuts. He said, nothing breeds success like success itself. Nothing breeds success like success itself. And he would say this to me every single day when I came into the office, and I couldn't stand it. But it is so much more brilliant coming out of my mouth now when I say it. Because if you look at that Hyattsville video, that's basically what that is focused on. Breeding success from the success that's already been created. I don't know a lot about your individual volunteer fire departments, but I am convinced of a couple of things. You have great people in your volunteer fire department. You have fire service leaders in your volunteer fire department. You know how I know that part? Because they're sitting here right in front of me. By virtue of your presence here on a Saturday, sharing with all of this and sharing your insight and ideas makes you a fire service leader. It's a part of the process. But we need to build off of those early successes, those early wins, to breed more success. But we can do a simple, what I commonly refer to as a bar napkin style needs assessment to say, all right, what roles do we have, what responsibilities, what ranks, what functions? Which of those could we do, are we doing well? Which could we do better if we had either an increased quantity or the right quality of people to do it with? Or what are we not doing at all? And go through that process and kind of map it out. Because if I asked you right now, how many more volunteers does your volunteer fire department need, would you have a solid answer for me? How many? Okay. But you say that actually, as many as you could get. I got 45 and doubled my membership. That's how many I could get. I was not adequately prepared to feed and clothe twice as many people though. So it's a careful what you wish for situation as well. Quantity does not equal quality. And you bring that up, and I'm not picking on you whatsoever, because it's a very easy trap for us to fall into. This catch-22 that if I had more people, I could free somebody up to actually do recruiting and retention, right? not taking into account if I got better at recruitment and retention, I'd end up with more people, right? And we fall into this trap of what I refer to as warm body-based recruiting. You have a pulse? Perfect, right? That's about the only requirement that we no brain activity, not a problem. But as long as you have a pulse, right, that's good enough. But think of the impact, the negative impact that that has had on our volunteer fire service, locally, regionally, and across the nation as well. How many volunteers do you need, but most importantly, what do you need them for? And until you quantify and qualify this part of the statement, you're going to be constantly chasing an unachievable goal, right? And from a recruitment and retention coordinator's position or fire service leadership position, how will you ever know if you've attained your goal if we don't quantify it and qualify it up front? Nothing breeds success like success itself. Well, let's look at the success we've already had in both recruiting and retaining, set our goal based on that to breed more success. Okay? It's a process. You can get a little more in depth. I've actually created a volunteer fire department needs assessment form, which again, I'm going to send you the link to. It's a little more scientific, okay, in quantifying and qualifying and giving you more ideas of what some of those positions and roles and functions might be. But most importantly, what are the qualities, attributes, characteristics, and KSAs that you're looking for? We took care of the characteristics, traits, and attributes, right? We built that list. Whether it's in your recruitment messaging or your job descriptions or your retention expectations, that's where those traits, characteristics, and attributes should lie. But do we ever ask our members what they're actually capable of? And what this member KSA knowledge, skill, ability, interest, and experience survey does is, although it's randomized by alphabetical order, what it is really sequenced to help you drive out, does this person have a skill set that we weren't aware of, that they could be utilizing to their fulfillment in ours? Are we using someone in a position where they have demonstrated no interest? From some of the responses you could see here, you could identify, do they prefer to work as an individual, part of a small group, or part of a larger team, and where will they thrive? Because when we maximize their satisfaction, we're going to maximize what in return? Their effort, their productivity, and their contributions to our organization. But the focus has to go back on them first, the with people part, so that we can accomplish the for people part. There are other people, I kind of categorize potential candidates into a couple of boxes. One of them is the person who comes from, maybe a administrative non-emergency background who has no interest in being one of the people who run into a burning building as all the same people are running out. Okay? But maybe we also have people who drive a desk by day and want to drive a fire engine at night. Had an instance for several years in my own volunteer fire department. An active paramedic for our local commercial EMS provider never rode our ambulance, but she was the treasurer of our fire department for about 10 years. Why didn't you think she ever rode our ambulance? She did it for a living and didn't want to then do it for volunteering. She prevented her own burnout in that regard. But most people would say, oh my God, you're a paramedic, you got to ride the ambulance, right? That's what we do. We categorize, we profile people, we pigeonhole them where we think they fit into our organization. If you use this KSAIE survey right properly, you'll be able to identify how they think they can fit into our organization. And it can also create some conversation about social opportunities and ways to build camaraderie and brotherhood and activities within your department as well. If we dig deeper, if we break it down even further, that's kind of just a non-scientific approach to it. One of the things we can do is determine whether or not our members are wearing the right color helmet. Has anybody here ever taken a personality test? Has anybody here ever tested positive for having a personality? I haven't, I'm just curious, okay? It's one of my goals, right? What personality test have you taken? Do you remember the name of it? Myers-Briggs. Anybody else? What's that? MIT's personality test? Yeah, okay. Well, there's several out there. My favorite is called the 4 lenses. And it breaks, basically there's 16 combination in that Myers-Briggs that breaks it down into 4 basic components. And they use colors to represent it. And I find it interesting that this is my favorite personality test, primarily because I'm colorblind. But I've been told in the upper right-hand corner, we have gold, lower right is green, lower left is orange, and upper left is blue. To me, that's bright gray, dark gray, medium gray, and so forth. But it's really identifying, conducting a personality test in your organization to determine whether or not we have people playing the right roles and are making the best use of where their interest and their personality lies. And all I've done is recharacterize that using different helmet colors. And if you look at the descriptions here, the 4 lenses, gold is obedient, allegiant, faithful, dependable, efficient, practical, proper, stable, organized, punctual, helpful. And the reality is, if you've ever taken one of these, you'll find keywords that may or may not apply, but in general, it's pretty accurate and it's tough to beat. Green is inventive, self-sufficient, persistent, theoretical, careful, systematic. Orange is action-oriented, quick-witted, charming, spontaneous, playful, risk-taker. Excuse me. Blue is sensitive, sincere, appreciative, artistic, idealistic, intuitive, romantic, loyal, caretaker. Now, I've simply assigned helmet colors to those. If you follow along, it makes pretty good sense. The white helmet, the yellow helmet for maybe a engineer or a technician or a lower level officer. The black being the hard charging line firefighter, and blue represents what? EMS, right? Caring, compassion, those things. So I've taken this test many times. I've taken other tests. And invariably, my primary colors in the 4 lenses are gold and green, primary and secondary, white and yellow. And when you look at it, when you go through this process, you have everybody complete the test, and unfortunately we can't do it in the time constraints today. But then you segregate all the participants by their primary color. You look around the room and all of a sudden the light goes on. Oh my God, it is so obvious as to why you are blue or why you are green or whatever the case may be, based on your personality type and based on what the emotions and approach that you project towards other people. So in my combination of white and yellow, they then assign labels, if you will, and are nothing more than just that, labels. And one of them is Field Marshal. And the tagline with Field Marshal is, you can't help but lead, which is really representative of how I've lived my life. I have never made a real good spectator. Either I'm in 150%, or I moved on to another project, whatever the case may be. When I was chief of my department, just being chief wasn't enough. I also coached my son's baseball league. I took my daughter to all her horseback riding competitions and was directly engaged in all of that. But once you understand people's primary helmet color, and if you have somebody wearing a blue helmet for EMS, yet they lack, inventive, but also insensitive and don't have that same caring and compassion, they're probably not going to be very good at what they do. But the reality is, regardless of what your primary helmet color is that you should be wearing, It takes all kinds. It takes caring and compassionate people. It takes risk takers. It takes calculated, logical problem solvers. And yes, it takes command presence and strong leadership attributes. Does that not describe all the primary components of every incident that we respond to? Right? We need all of those people. And again, it's all about fitting people with the right helmet. It's about understanding what motivates them and where you can take it from there. So you can see those characteristics. The yellow helmet, careful, logical, inventive, persistent. You know, for me, that explains why I spent 15 years in engineering and then got into sales. And then once I got into marketing and discovered I had this whole other side of my brain that I didn't know I had, I didn't care if I ever did another stitch of engineering again. But I can tell you in problem solving and the things that I work with today, I go directly to the marketing and then I work my way backwards towards the total solution. And it's as if I flip my brain the same way that we have to flip our brain when you're using a thermal imager. If I held a thermal imager, if I looked at all of you with a thermal imager right now in front of me, you compared to the inanimate objects around you would be brighter or darker? Brighter, right? But when we go into a fire situation where the temperature is 400 or 500 degrees and a human body is laying there, theoretically, is it warmer or cooler than the ambient temperature, the surrounding temperature? Cooler, right? What's our core body temperature? 98.6, right? Okay, on a good day. So through a thermal imager, how does the human body look in a room that's on fire? Brighter or darker? Darker. We have to flip our brain. We have to think like the thermal imager and understand the way that we are looking at people and the way that they're looking back at us. Understanding that logical piece of the yellow helmet. You know, I'll tell you a little insider information. The last couple of times I've taken this same test, there's been some, instead of just primary white helmet and then secondary yellow helmet, meaning command presence and logical, there's been this infiltration of black helmet. And when I think of black helmet, when I think of orange in the four lenses, I think of a mountain climbing surfer dude, laid back but a risk taker. Okay, and then there's been more influence of the black helmet in my recent tests, and I thought about that. I said, you know, I am nothing related to laid back by any stretch. But I looked at the risk taker part of it, and you know, not that running into burning buildings isn't risk taking, but I look at where I am in my career and in my life with a higher confidence level, I'm now willing to take more risks. And in my case, my greatest risk I took was, well, retiring at an early age, and it's worked out great so far. So I encourage you to go through those processes if you have the opportunity to, or bring somebody back in to facilitate that in your own organization. You can learn a lot about each other. And when you learn a lot about each other, you can gain greater respect, and you can gain greater cohesiveness as well. Now, before you blurt out your answer, my answer is you can pick your friends and you can pick your nose, but you can't pick your family. Right? You ever heard that before? You can't pick your family. Well, I believe that the fire service, and especially the volunteer fire service, is an exception to this rule. What do we call each other? How do we refer to each other as? Brother, sister. And the people back at the firehouse collectively refer to as our second family, right? Okay. How long, let me ask you this. What takes longer, getting somebody into your volunteer fire department or getting the bad ones the heck out? Getting the bad ones the heck out, right? How long does it take to somebody to go from the moment they demonstrated an interest in joining to raising their right hand? 30 days? 60? 90? 120? You give me 150. 150 over here? Okay? I don't care what that duration is, but as we look at, if you are come to consensus that it takes longer to get the bad ones out than it gets to get the right ones in, and if you agree that we are the exception to the rule, that we can pick our family, doesn't it make sense that whatever that onboarding process looks like, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days or longer, that we look for more opportunities to engage with that individual to figure out whether or not they're going to be the right fit for our fire service family, than worrying about whether or not we can get them to pull the bail back on a nozzle and get water out of it. Doesn't that make sense? Right? Because once you get a bad apple in there, how long do we live with that bad apple? A long time, right? And can the spoiling of one person spoil the other apples in your department? Absolutely. It can have significant impact. And the department's inability to help them find other volunteering opportunities outside of the fire service can have a very detrimental impact on the morale of your entire department. So I encourage you to look for increasing both the quantity and the quality of opportunities to increase the level of engagement with prospective members of your volunteer fire department long before they ever raise their right hand, to determine whether or not they're the right fit for your fire service family. We could argue that we can teach a monkey to pull a bail back on a nozzle, right? And get water out of it. I think I'm a living example of that after 37 years in the fire service. Even I feel fairly confident I can accomplish that. But can we teach everyone to be a caring, compassionate, trusting, trustworthy, loyal, respectful, disciplined member of our fire service family? No. Not everybody is well suited for that. It could be something as simple as they're an only child and we're bringing them into a huge family, right? They're not accustomed to that. They're not comfortable in that environment. They don't know how to act and react in that situation. Or it simply could be characteristics, traits, and attributes that were never instilled in them when they were younger, okay? Because they didn't get that strong, effective leadership at home, they didn't get it at school, and now when we find them at our firehouse door, they're not the right fit for our fire service family. So I believe strongly that we are the exception to you. You can pick your friends, you can pick your nose, but you can't pick your family. Some food for thought there. Brings it back to another term we use extensively today, brotherhood. And I wrote an article probably a year and a half ago titled, How Deep Does Your Brotherhood Burn? Because the way I see it, I break it down into 4 major categories. There's branded, that's what you're wearing on your t-shirt, what I have on my shirt, what I refer to as the universal symbol for instant acceptance, right? You give you the keys to the firehouse or the keys to the city if you play it right, right? That sometimes branded brotherhood is how we greet each other, how we treat each other in public. Sometimes branded brotherhood occurs over a shared adult beverage or something along those lines. And then there's core brotherhood. And core brotherhood is the standard of human relations that we establish for how we will treat each other inside of the firehouse. Establishing that baseline of human interactions and human relations that I spoke about earlier. And then there's intrinsic brotherhood. And intrinsic brotherhood says, I will lay down right next to you and take a beating as we're crawling down that proverbial dark, hot, smoky hallway, right? When the fire is beating us down and maybe we're trapped and maybe it's John Wayne time or however you want to describe that aha or uh-oh moment that you're experiencing. But the reality is, none of us will ever truly know how we're going to react in that situation until we find ourselves in that situation. So that's intrinsic. but the lowest level or the deepest level is what I call real or authentic. It's the type of brotherhood that looking around the room and seeing the faces and the, dare I say, hair colors and lack thereof and so forth, it's the type of brotherhood that many of us in this space were raised on. It's the type of brotherhood where my grown children today still have people they refer to as aunt and uncle, and have never been blood relatives. They've been firehouse relatives. It's brotherhood that you know it when you see it, you miss it when it's gone, you feel it when it's stuck in your back. Okay? But real brotherhood is on one hand a combination of the first three branded, core and intrinsic, but it's so much more, it's so much deeper than that. And it's not just how we take care of each other out in public, inside the firehouse, or in that proverbial hot, smoky hallway, but it's how we treat each other outside the firehouse. It's how we socialize together. It's how we take care of each other when one of us is falling on hard times. It's when we all pitch in to help a brother or sister out, whether it's a new roof on the house, pitching in to take care of their kids, whatever form that comes in. That's real brotherhood, that's authentic brotherhood. And at least in my estimation, that's the level of brotherhood that we need to get back to in the fire service if we have any chance of it surviving and succeeding and looking anything like the fire service we've grown up in, come to love, and cherish every day. Has anybody here ever been on the receiving end of brotherhood? Tell me that story. Yeah, Chief Love talked about that earlier, right? Nothing beats a good fire, a good incident where we all had to come together and work together as a team, as a brotherhood and sisterhood, to really rally the troops and build up morale. Anybody else here ever been on the receiving end? Sir?
I was in an accident, obviously, and I was in the hospital in Texas. A bunch of you guys and some guys that I used to work with and some guys that I met during the time showed up at my house and built a ramp.
Awesome. Wonderful. I'll share with you one story, just one of many instances where I was on the receiving end of real brotherhood in the fire service. It was my first trip to the National Fire Academy in 2007. I'd been chosen to be a cadre of instructors from around the country to teach a new program called Leadership Through Safety. And not only had I never been to the National Fire Academy before, but I had also never been to Gettysburg. Excuse me. So I flew into BWI, I rented the vehicle, I went up to the National Fire Academy in Emmitsburg, had a quick dinner, and then drove up to the battlefield. And as I'm standing on the highest point of the battlefield, anybody here ever been to Emmitsburg? NFA and Gettysburg? Okay. There's a header of clouds, and the sun is just an orange ball wedged in between the top of the mountains and the bottom of this header of clouds, where lightning is going sideways in the clouds. And the thunder sounded an awful lot like eerily cannon fire. It was a really cool experience. And as I'm standing there on the highest point of the battlefield, the skies opened up in such a torrential downpour rain that there was not even a thought of trying to run to my vehicle and escaping it. All I could do was stand there and take it. My shoes immediately filled up with water, and I stood there and laughed out loud that I was going to drown standing up. The rain stopped, went to my vehicle, drove back, drenched to the bone to the fire academy, went into my room in the dorm, and got up the next morning and went to class for the first day. Throughout the day, I'm thinking to myself, oh man, these cots are not very comfortable. I must have slept wrong. I had this pain in my side, so I'm trying to stretch it out. I'm with 25 other instructors from around the country who I had never met. Built some closeness with them and kind of some camaraderie. Afterwards, as a group, we go up to Gettysburg to have dinner. They got some adult beverages, and we watched the sun go down on the top of Widow Round Top. And we drove back down to Emmitsburg. One of the guys in our group realized he'd lost his phone on the battlefield, so we drove back up to Gettysburg. It was dark by then, the phone lit up, fortunately we found it. We drove back down to Emmitsburg, and it was about, 15 miles between them each way. We're standing on the front pad of the Vigilant Hose Company in downtown Emmitsburg, and about to go into the Odd House to enjoy another adult beverage or pop. And I said to the guys I was with, guys, I hate to be that guy, but I'm literally not going to make it through the night. This pain in my side was so sharp that I just could not catch a breath. I could sense myself hyperventilating. So, being a group of firefighters, naturally they called 911. The Emmitsburg Volunteer Ambulance Corps came. Frederick County paramedics came. They immediately started, without doing anything else, a full cardiac workup, including putting nitro under my tongue. Don't ever want to experience that again. And they take me to the hospital. Back up to Gettysburg. My third or fourth trip to Gettysburg in the last 2 days. Laying in the emergency room, they're doing a full workup on me, and it's about 45 minutes into it. I'm laying in the emergency room bed thinking to myself, I'm in Gettysburg, they're in Emmitsburg, they have my rental vehicle, and I have no cell phone numbers. This should be interesting. About 15 minutes later, a nurse walks in and she says, just so you know, there's 8 firefighters in the waiting room waiting for you. And I said, well, I'd like to tell you I'm shocked and surprised, but I'm not. And she says, well, don't worry about them because they're entertaining everybody else. I said, I'm not shocked or surprised about that either. And she says, I can only send in 2. Which 2 would you like me to send in? I said, well, there ain't a right 2 between them, so it doesn't really matter. Well, needless to say, she sent in the wrong 2, who easily quadrupled my pain. And Henry Costo, who retired as a deputy commissioner of the Philadelphia Fire Department, and Mike Teague, who just retired as a captain out in Sacramento. And those 8 guys stayed with me until 3:30 in the morning until they discharged me. Took me back to the fire academy, got me settled in my room, said don't even set an alarm. Went into class about 9:30 the following morning. They took my room key, they packed my things, they called the airline, changed my flight, and drove me to the airport. I've been lifelong friends with those 8 guys for well over 24 hours. Right? And we are now lifelong friends ever since then. It's been 11 years. And every single time we're together, whether it's at a conference or FDIC or any time we see each other around the country, trust me, we relive that story at my expense. So that's one story of being on the receiving end of brotherhood. And I've also had the great honor and pleasure of being on the giving end of brotherhood as well. A very dear friend of mine, Denny Allen, chief of my department. I was his assistant chief for many years, needed a double lung transplant. And using the incident command system, I rallied over 60 friends and families who had never used the incident command system, and over the course of 6 months held individual fundraisers and eventually a large single-day fundraiser that raised tens of thousands of dollars for him and his family. And it was literally like Old Home Week and the best party we'd ever had, neighborhood party, because we had used the incident command system to plan the living daylights out of it, that when it came to the day of the fundraising event, there was nothing left to worry about, and we had a great time. And over 1,000 people came to this fundraiser. And the greatest honor I ever received in return, and it was in September 8th of 2008, he received his double lung transplant on July 2nd, just a couple months before. And on December 17th, 2011, his wife gave me the privilege of holding his hand as then he took his last breath. And I was there at his house a week before Christmas. That's the kind of brotherhood I was raised on. That's all of these things, branded core, intrinsic, but real brotherhood, all rolled into one. And if you ask me what some of the challenges of today's volunteer fire service are as it relates to retention, I know one thing for sure, that real brotherhood is the key to our success. It's what's gotten us to where we are today. It is what will help us survive and succeed and thrive in the future moving forward. I had the opportunity last year in April to sit on a 5-person panel discussion in Washington, D.C. for the National Volunteer Fire Council to discuss just a simple 5-minute quick down and dirty conversation on the subject of the sustainability of the volunteer fire service in the United States. Just a quick 5-minute discussion. There's not a lot to it, right? Silver bullet solution, we're out of here, right? And very pointedly, I had a gentleman, honestly, I think I was targeted. I think I was profiled. And he stood up and pointed at me and said, what is the #1 challenge of fire service leadership today? And very blunt about it and forceful. And I said, that's easy. The greatest challenge of fire service leadership today is getting to know your people. Getting to know your people. It's what Chief Love talked about. It's getting into a degree in me. Getting into a degree in your team. Getting to know them to that level that you should never wonder why they've been gone for the last 2 or 3 or 4 months or longer in your fire department. You should never wonder that, because you'll know right up front, because they'll have the courage and the trust to share that with you. And if we're doing our jobs right, we're helping with whatever situation is creating that situation that's keeping them away from our fire department. Because we're practicing, we're putting into action real, authentic brotherhood. That's what it's about. It's about getting to know your people, because when we get to know our people, we will truly understand what their knowledge, skills, abilities, experience, interests, their strengths, and their weaknesses are. Right? Anybody ever seen this chart before? You tell me what it is? Maslow's hierarchy of need, right? When was this created? Anybody know? It's been over a century, in case you don't know. It's been around a while. Has any of this changed? Has it been adapted? Has anybody come back and said, no, I don't think that's accurate, or anything else like that? And in my Xbox Live class, we talk about these perceived differences between our generations and their generation. And we think that gap is wide, and everybody is so focused on the gap when I focus on the connections. Because at the core of it, what we really are is simply people. We're people with the same hierarchy of needs. Now, I won't discount the fact that this generation might be slightly different. I mean, they might have a couple of additional needs that they have. But really, the core is all there, right? None of that has changed. And when we get to know people, what makes them click, what motivates them, what their fears are, what their strengths or weaknesses, all of those things that we've already discussed, that's when we're going to win the fight of recruitment and retention. Let's talk about incentive programs for a second. You have somebody that comes into your fire department, and let's say he's a hat guy, he's a t-shirt guy, and he's a job shirt guy. Does it make sense that everybody gets hats? No, because somebody's going to be what? Disappointed, right? I don't wear hats. Sorry, I don't need a hat, right? Okay. Does it make sense that everybody gets a hat, a t-shirt, and a job shirt just for walking in the door and not doing anything? No, that doesn't make sense either. What do we call that in modern terms as it relates to this generation? Everybody gets a trophy. Thank you, Chief. Absolutely. That's what that's about. And for those of you keeping in score, by the way, I'm a size large in all of those, and I do have room in my bag. But really, to understand incentives, a lot of people ask me, well, what's an incentive program that's worked? What are you asking me for? I'm not the one receiving the incentive. Ask your people. To ask your people starts a conversation. To ask your people gets to know your people and help them understand what motivates them. And I would argue in many of those instances, our incentive programs are completely targeting the wrong audience. I frankly, I'm not saying I don't want, but I don't need another hat, a t-shirt, or a job shirt, okay? That's not what motivates me. What motivates me is the opportunity to continue to serve. But that's a direct disincentive to the people who support me, because it takes me away from them more frequently, okay? One of the smartest things that my dear friend Bruce Green, he and I were chiefs together, ever did as an incentive was to send a handwritten thank you note to my wife Lori, thanking her for the sacrifices she made, which were the only things, or which is what made my contributions possible. And I gotta tell you, that single handwritten thank you note kept me out of the doghouse for well over 2 weeks before I did something else to screw it up. But make sure we're targeting the right audience with our incentive programs. I conducted a family satisfaction survey with the fire department several years ago. And 2 things came out of that family satisfaction survey. If you know anything about surveys, a good response of any survey is about 3%. We got over 70% response. They were very eager to share their views. We didn't just ask the members if they were satisfied, we asked the families if they were satisfied with their fire department. And the 2 most glaring outcomes of that survey were the greatest thing the fire department has ever done for the families is ask us our opinion. Send us this survey. And the second point that they made sure that we heard loud and clear was, you already do so much for the families and we appreciate all of it. But for the love of God, could we just once do something not on fire department property? Right? Because when we're together in the firehouse, how does the conversation go? The same way every single time. So take that into consideration when we're doing family events, and specifically for spouses and thank you events and acknowledgement. Maybe take it off-site, maybe take it to a different location. So maybe, just maybe, we could actually change up the conversation a little bit. Okay? What incentive programs do your fire departments offer? An appreciation day every year for your firefighters and your families. Excellent. How was that received? Pretty well? Great. Where they belong, off the side, out of the way, yeah, so it not so cumbersome and getting in the way all the time. I would never say that in front of them, I realize that, okay? Or loud enough for them to hear it. That's great. What else? What other incentive programs do you guys do? I like barbecue. Not a great swimmer, but okay. What's the date? Yeah. Okay.
We also do a point system for your attendance to work plans, calls, meetings. After that, you can get a rope bag, whatever you want.
Yep.
Points you get.
Cool.
And then we're starting a new one this year, water ball.
Nice.
We get together, have a little practice on the nozzles,
Uh-huh.
have a little fun.
That's good, clean fun right there, water ball. Yep. Or keg hockey and stuff like that.
No,
Yep.
we actually use a basketball.
Yeah, yeah, no, I get that. Yep. Oh, on the ground? Yeah,
It's
nice.
actually a lot of fun.
Cool, cool. And that was the fire service activities that many of us grew up on, right? And we enjoyed and so forth. And to the credit of this generation, we might be sitting here thinking, well, they're not going to see that as fun. Well, if we've never engaged them in it, if we've never asked, if we've never given them the opportunity, then we could just be missing the boat, and because we didn't get to know them and truly understand what it was that motivated them. Because there's so many other pieces, the teamwork that comes out of that, and certainly the mechanics of it, and working together as a team. Other types of incentive programs? Sure.
Free membership to the recreation centers in the county.
Oh, nice. Memberships to recreation centers, that's great. Not mandatory, right? Just,
That's free for the member and discount for the family.
Great. Yes? Great. Wonderful. Wonderful. Real brotherhood. Hanging out, bonfire, s'mores, popcorn, movie, love all of it. Did I mention ice cream? Because I like ice cream, so we should have ice cream too. If we could have ice cream, it would be great. Because that's what motivates me. Birthday cards, volunteers. Wonderful. Nice. Handwritten. Nice. Very nice touch. Yeah. And that's the key here is ask your volunteers what motivates them. And I know the answers you're going to get. Well, I don't need any of that stuff. What they don't understand, what none of us understand, is that that form of acknowledgement, that recognition, that incentive, is really not about us, the recipient. It's about the people who made what we do possible, as well as, hopefully, it's an incentive to people who may not have also earned that same incentive. So hopefully it's a motivator to them as well. But what it also does is if we adopt the attitude that I spoke of earlier, of treating every single public interaction as a public service, public education, public relations, and a recruitment opportunity, and we publicly thank our volunteers, which one of those categories does that fit into? Virtually all of them, right? Okay. Which one of those challenges on the big board of why people don't join does that address? Awareness and information, right? Public relations. See how it all ties together? And that's why we really can't, they asked me to come here and talk to you specifically about retention, but the reality is recruitment and retention are so integrated, so interlocked that we can't hardly talk about one without the other. And if one of your retention issues is that you have internal conflict and that creates a public image, that affects recruitment, right? But if you have a highly trained, highly motivated, high-performing organization, that affects recruitment, doesn't it? It all ties together, so we have to look at the big picture of it. We have to look at the complete volunteer life cycle. And from also answering the question of the challenge of fire service leadership today, I literally just wrote this on a napkin for a battalion chief in the FDNY who I met at FDIC because he was in writer's block and presenter's gridlock and he just couldn't break free from it. Because here's a battalion chief in the 3rd Battalion of the FDNY who his best friend told him, stop telling so many darn stories. Are you nuts? That guy has more stories than I have years in the, hours in a day, and years in the fire service and so forth. The power of what he has to share is in his stories. And I shared with him my theory of connectivity. Because today to be a fire service leader, it takes more than just being an effective communicator. We need to be an effective connector. And my theory of connectivity is this: great storytelling plus relevant application divided by a genuine interest in the listener. Great storytelling without relevant application is, hey, nice story, thanks for sharing it, right? Relevant application without a story to tie it to lacks context, lacks connectivity. and you remove a genuine interest in the listener, and no great story or relevant application can save you. It takes more than just effective communications, and when we're talking specifically about retention in the volunteer fire service, it takes connectivity. And there's a balance to that equals one. And there's also a fine line between telling too many darn stories and having the relevant application. My good friend Dr. Candace McDonald did her entire doctoral thesis on retention in the volunteer fire service. This is available online, and if you're ever looking for a great presenter and a great educator, I encourage you to reach out to her. But it breaks it down and talks about the challenge and the costs and the impacts of the reduction in volunteers in our fire service, but then gives real-world retention strategies. And I'm just going to point to a couple of them. Recognition, family involvement, and opportunities for employee success are some of the things that we talked about today. And she does a program. She and I are actually, if anybody here is attending the IFC VCOS Symposium in the Sun in November, she and I are doing a 6-hour workshop tag teaming with some of the stuff I shared today, plus the rest of my Call to Duty class, and her removing barriers to recruitment and retention success. So let's talk about rebooting our recruitment and retention efforts. Show you this quick. Just a quick promo for our Soldier Firefighter program, Connecting the Dots. And again, relates to this, rebooting your recruitment retention efforts. Look for some of those low-hanging fruit solutions that can have some of that impact. Process is progress, and if you don't have a plan as to how you're going to recruit and retain your volunteers, you need to have one. Another resource that you'll see in the Dropbox, but an action plan of assessing your need for volunteers and what you need them for, planning for new volunteers, making sure you can accommodate all of them logistically, identifying opportunities for change, training your existing force to increase your force as well, creating messages and media that include a call to action and challenge the prospect to get involved, demonstrate the need of and for volunteers. I'm going to make one editorial comment about this. Is there a difference between the word need and want? What does need often imply? Necessity, desperation at times, right? Has anybody seen was running around Facebook for the last couple of weeks, the department, I want to say in New England, one of the New England states, that literally put up bright orange signs saying that they were desperate for volunteers, and if they didn't get more immediately, they were shutting down. That's a brutal statement. I unfortunately don't think that necessarily did anything to help their cause, because some people might take it and say, who wants to be a part of a sinking ship? Because maybe they've already sunk and they just haven't given into that fact yet. And not speaking for them or for the situation, but obviously the desperation came through. And again, there's a huge difference to me between the difference of being needed and wanted. I say all the time, there's no limitable list of people in my life who need me in their life. The list of people who want me in their life, that might be a much shorter list, okay? But it's the difference between me coming up to you and saying, yeah, I gotta tell you, we're really desperate for volunteers, and if you can volunteer today, what if no one answers the call? I mean, we're gonna be in real big trouble here. So we need you to volunteer. Is that very motivating? Hey, and I'm sorry, what's your name again? Marilyn, I've been watching some of the work you've been doing in some of these other volunteer organizations in the community, and we're pretty excited about it. We want you to belong to our organization. Let me tell you about all the great benefits that we offer. Is that a different conversation? Did I make one feel differently than the other, right? But a lot of it has to do with the messaging, the marketing, and how we do that, implementing innovative solutions, measuring that progress. If you don't have a plan in place and you can't quantify or qualify how many volunteers you have, want, and what your goal is, how will we ever know if we achieve that goal? And if we don't know if we've achieved it, how will we ever be able to celebrate it? How will we ever be able to breed success from success itself? Look at your entire process, say where are the gaps, what are we missing, where can we fill in the blanks, and most importantly, where are we losing people in the process? And when I talked about, again, this generation specifically, if you don't have some of these tools in your recruitment and retention toolkit, you may not be as successful at gaining their attention and getting them involved, because they want information and they want it documented, and they do need, again, that positive and frequent reimbursement. On the retention side, certainly there's a lot of issues that you can address. Look at each of these subjects as it relates specifically to your volunteer fire department and say, where can we improve our processes? Where can we improve the outcomes as well? The organization that focuses solely on whether or not its members are meeting the needs of the organization and fails to recognize whether or not the organization is meeting the needs of its members is destined for failure, obsolescence, and maybe even extinction. This encapsulates everything I shared with you in that retention cliff theory, because for too long we've only been focused on whether or not the members are meeting the needs of the organization. And until we focus on whether or not the organization is meeting the needs of its individual members, we will not succeed. We will not possibly even survive. Another great Paul Combs cartoon. This symbol owes you nothing, but if you dedicate yourself to it, it will give you everything, what I refer to as the universal symbol for instant acceptance. One of my own, everything you say, you do, you wear, and in this day and age, you post, reflects on you as an individual, your fire department, and the fire service at large, and on me too. I take this very personally, so act accordingly. And I say all the time, we're not guaranteed of much in this business, but the opportunity to encounter someone else every single day who's having a much worse day than we are. And that's not a burden, but a gift, and it's called the gift of perspective. I was just reminded of this on Monday, when leaving a meeting with a county fire department in Rochester, New York. I went to get on the New York State Thruway, and as I'm going through the Easy Pass lane, the woman in the lane next to me decides to change lanes, and despite my acceleration to avoid her, she clipped the back end of my car. Actually, even worse, my wife's car. So I'm in the doghouse. I pull over to the shoulder, she pulls in behind me. What could have been some of my very typical reactions to that? How do people respond in those situations? Anger, not kindly, right? And I stepped out of the vehicle. My first question was, is everybody in your vehicle okay? And she assured me that they were. And I literally took a breath, and I said, where were you coming from? And she said, well, my daughter and I had just come from Golisano Children's Hospital visiting my 4-year-old granddaughter who had to be admitted due to complications from her leukemia treatments. I was given the gift of perspective. I had some scratches. It's about $1,500 damage on my wife's vehicle. Even she's forgiven me for that. But the outcomes could have been a lot different, and the outcomes certainly would have changed if I had come at her with the wrong attitude. And instead, I was given that gift, and that's a gift of perspective. And that's one small thing. But in everything that we respond to and do in fire and emergency services, this is the gift that we're given every day. So anytime I think I'm having a bad day, my pager goes off reminding me, not so bad, right? Right? That's what it's about. That's that caring and compassion. It's something that we can't ever lose. My wife has a great way of keeping me grounded. I served as our county's incident commander for the crash of Continental Flight 3407 on February 12, 2009, where 50 souls were lost. And I had left the house at about 10:30 on a Thursday night, went to the crash scene, came home at midnight Friday night for the first time, never saw her, was back in the EOC at 5 o'clock that morning, and on that morning, she very reluctantly at that point got on a plane and flew to visit her sister in Wisconsin. And me being the hopeless romantic, I figured out a way to get through airport security, and my goal was to get to the gate before she took off so I could give her a kiss goodbye, because I hadn't seen her since the crash. And she had already gone to bed that night and didn't even know I was there. And as luck would have it, I got to the gate and the plane had boarded 5 minutes early, so I missed my opportunity. So about 8 o'clock that night, I went home and I reached out to my then 16-year-old son and said, when I get home, let's go out for dinner. He said, okay, I'll be waiting for you. And I got home, and there was a note on the kitchen table, and it was from my wife, and it said, please remember to feed the cats, give them water, and clean the litter box. But if you can't read that, the most important words she wrote were, and do the same for yourself. And it was a great reminder that everything we're exposed to, everything we encounter, everything we experience, that all of us, as it relates to the issues that we're dealing with today, PTSD, health, wellness, and if you don't know, we're losing more fire and EMS personnel to suicide than we are in the line of duty. Suicide is a real issue in our environment, and that's something that we need to address. And I offered that as part of a prayer at our command briefing the following Sunday morning, and again, she is a great way of keeping me grounded in all of that. And it's a great reminder that it's not about us. It's about those we serve with, and most importantly, those who allow us to serve. Those we serve, our friends, our neighbors, the people who visit and come through our communities. Those we serve with, our brother and sister firefighters, and having an appreciation not only for the contributions and value that they bring every single day, but also for the challenges and obstacles they face in serving to the level that they want to serve, and respecting that as well. And losing the attitude that it's about what have you done for me lately, but looking at the history of our connection and our brotherhood and our family. And those who allow us to serve, our predecessors, the very people who built the foundation for this great thing we call the fire service that we know and love. Our officers, and having respect for the fact that in order for them to be good leaders, we first have to learn how to be good followers, and just like we have a job to do, they have a job to do as well. And if you've ever seen the Capital One credit card commercial, they ask, what's in your wallet? Chief Billy Goldfeder takes it a little further and he says, who's in your wallet? And I've taken it one step further and I ask the question, who's in your helmet? Because if I had it with me right now, my county chief's helmet, if you flipped over the underside, written on the back rim is 3 words, Lori, Kathleen, and Alex. And I refer to that as my 3-part risk management plan, that I have an obligation to make good decisions and the proper tactics, training, and strategies that's going to allow me to go home to them at the end of every shift, at the end of every call. And I also say that if you know any good firefighters, we're not the ones making the real sacrifices. The people making the real sacrifices are the ones who don't get up in the middle of the night, the ones who don't leave the dinner table, but the ones who are left behind every single time that alarm bell rings, offering us yet another opportunity to go and do what we love. And those are the folks that we have an obligation to. Those are the folks in our helmet. I firmly believe that there's little we're actually in control of in our lives, but one thing we are in control of is our attitudes, our perspectives, and our outlook. And if we can gain better control of our outlook, we have better control of the outcomes. When faced with a challenge in your personal or professional life, do you immediately go to, oh, that's an obstacle, that's a problem? Or do you say, it's an obstacle, but I have an obligation to address it because some jamoke from Buffalo told me I had to? Or when faced with a personal or professional challenge, do you look at it and say, I have real opportunity for positive change in myself and others in our organization. Because if we can control our outlook, we can control the outcomes. And my call to action associated with this is, of everything we've shared and discussed today, and the ideas that we put on the table and the opportunities for change are there. Change or don't, I don't really care. But change or don't, be surprised by the outcome. This is my polite way of saying, if we know what the outcomes will be, if we don't try, don't come whining to me. So the last burning question for all of you is there a fire in you? Hopefully I've satisfied two goals that I had for today, and hopefully it's a goal that you shared as well. The first was to share with you that many, if not most, of the challenges the solutions to the challenges we face in today's fire service are within our reach. And I'm confident that we accomplished our second goal, and that is you prove to me and to each other that many, if not most, of those challenges are right here in this room amongst all of you. And I hope you share that with me in feedback. So your field assignments, your homework is thank our hosts, thank Chief Phillips, thank Shakir and Jenny and this great facility, and Chief Jay. Please connect with me on one of those multi-channels that I happen to be on. Continue this conversation. And also, Jenny so nicely reminded me, I have parting gifts for all of you. I know one of the things that we deal with, especially with today's generation, is they want instant gratification, right? So in light of that, I have badge stickers for all of you, because you need instant gratification too. And that's something they learn from us. So whether you think your department's recruitment and retention efforts are in need of rescue, you're in recovery mode and all is lost, or simply, hopefully, by virtue of your participation in our conversation today, you've gotten a little bit of a reboot. Be ready to recruit, be ready to retain, be ready to serve. And I'm going to end the conversation with the same 4 words I end every communication, and that is stay safe, train often. Thank you so much for sharing your conversation with me today.